So with Borderlands 3's main story all wrapped up for the time being, we're all sitting here wondering, how do we reverse what just happened? How do we make what the story did not do that? Well, the answers may actually be more optimistic than you think. You see, aside from the general story Borderlands 3 told with the Children of the Vault and the Calypsos, perhaps not being the most thought-provoking villains we've encountered, what winds up being felt by the end of the story is, well, that wasn't very satisfying. Specifically, what I'm talking about are the deaths that happen throughout this game, most notably Maya and Lilith, both characters having built up relevance and popularity amongst fans from previous entries. Yet both of their characters come to a demise in what many would describe as not very impactful. After having been stripped of her siren powers from the very beginning of the game, Lilith must figure out how to manage without them. I'm just kidding, Lilith does pretty much what she primarily did back in Borderlands 2 as well, and that's just send us on missions. There's not really any sort of major struggle with her identity without her powers. She's just a lot less convenient, which is unfortunate. All Tyreen really uses Lilith's powers for are to teleport in and out of locations, as well as teleporting enemies in and out of locations. For what seems like a huge event, not much is done with any of the characters. Lilith's struggle is all but non-existent, so when she does get her powers back, what does she do? She sacrifices herself to stop Elpis from opening Pandora's vault. Jeez, even I didn't know the Firehawk's powers were strong enough to stop an entire moon. Yet what the game paints as her death doesn't feel quite so earned. It winds up coming off as a more spur-of-the-moment decision, which kills off who has pretty much become the face of the franchise for no good reason. And I don't care if you play Girl on Fire by Alicia Keys, it doesn't make the random character death any less random. So now, after having beaten the game, many are left to believe Brick and Mordecai are the only original Vault Hunters left, despite not having had a huge role in the story, nor witnessing their friends' death. But what if I told you Lilith is not dead, and she can come back? There are three major theories that can all be correlated, or they might have nothing to do with each other, or perhaps only one may be right or even relevant, and of course, maybe none of them are correct. But either way, death may not be so permanent. The first thing attention must be called to is Elpis itself. Upon sacrificing herself to stop the Destroyer from getting released, Pandora's moon Elpis now bears a mark in the shape of the Firehawk, hovering over the residents of the planet she sacrificed herself for. Very poetic in a sense. But what exactly happened? How did Lilith muster up enough strength to stop the entire moon from approaching any closer? During Borderlands 2's Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary DLC, Lilith was hardly capable of blowing up Colonel Hector and Sanctuary, and that's when she consumed all of Crazy Earl's Iridium. Now she all of a sudden gets her powers back and has enough strength to stop the moon without any Iridium? On top of that, how did she stop the moon? Did she ram her body headfirst into it, creating enough force to counter the gravitational pull? When put into question and compared to past feats of strength, Lilith's action at the end of Borderlands 3 doesn't particularly make sense. Theory number one revolves around the idea that Lilith never died. Rather, what had happened was she phase walked into the moon itself, thus stopping it. You see, Lilith's phase walking ability has gone a lot more underutilized ever since Borderlands 2. In fact, she rarely ever uses it anymore. The games began to give her this Firehawk shtick, surrounding her with more fire-based abilities. Don't get me wrong, that's always been in her kit, but her phase walking began to become more like phase teleporting. Nevertheless, despite the things she is now capable of, the more important question to ask is what is happening? When Lilith phase walks, what does that entail? Why does she disappear, become invulnerable, and what is it that is happening to her body? You see, the games have never been exactly clear on that. I mean, up until this game, the only thing we knew about sirens was the number of them, and even that's been called into question recently. Believe it or not, some lore has actually been given to Lilith's powers and what happens to her. In late 2012, early 2013, a series of comics were released called Borderlands Origins. These, as the title describes, told the origin stories of the four original Vault Hunters. Before you question the credibility of these comics, they were indeed written by Mikey Newman, famously voice of Scooter, but also one of the writers for Borderlands 1 and 2. So it's not some random person person semi-familiar with the series, rather it's someone who knows it in and out. Thought and consideration went into what was being told in these. Now, it can be up for debate whether or not these are still considered canon, but I'm not concerned with every single detail from each one of these comics. All I'm concerned with is Lilith. In the very beginning of the issue, she mentions how when she phase walks, her body goes into another dimension. Material doesn't just disappear and reappear from nowhere. She has to go somewhere. Her body goes somewhere. It just seems as though that somewhere is outside the realm of normal comprehension. And this idea only holds further support. Going off on a bit of a tangent, amongst all of Nereid's echoes, one in particular calls into question the Iridian's language. She questions why the Iridian's term for homeworld is also first landing.
I may be the last to ever learn the Iridian language from one of their own. I have so many questions I should have asked them while I had the chance. Like why the Iridian term for homeworld also means first landing.
It may be likely the Iridians aren't from the dimension we are familiar with. The Iridians came here and landed on Necrotafeo, where they chose to inhabit. It is their current homeworld, but not their original. So if the law of how her siren powers work remain true based off of what was considered in this comic, Lilith could have phase walked into the moon, and for whatever reason, her body is now stuck in limbo, trapped between dimensions, perhaps in a similar way to the Vault monsters. It may be why Nereid was capable of preventing her powers from moving to another host for so long, because the Vault's interior is in the unknown. All of this is only furthered by the fact that once the game is over and Lilith's room is unlocked, you are capable of activating the Vault key and its contents. And when opened, it shows the moon with the Firehawk's wings. The Vault key is more knowledgeable than any of us and always seems to point into the direction of something relevant. And this is no small Easter egg. The biggest clue that hints to Lilith still being alive takes place in the end credits. Through all of the pictures shown, there's one in particular that shows Tannis pretty much doing what I'm doing right now, and that's trying to figure out where Lilith is. Tannis clearly doesn't believe she is dead, and it appears as though she's trying to figure out where she currently has gone. The big thing you should take away from this isn't the exact series of events I just described, but the existence of another dimension and what Lilith's phase-walking ability could have to do with it. The second theory as to how Lilith is alive is much shorter, doesn't have as much support behind it, and perhaps I should have started with this one. But the idea here is that Lilith is akin to a phoenix, that the whole Firehawk persona has been given parallels to the bird that when it dies, rises from the ashes once more. Ironically, this creature is not something of legend in this game. In fact, it is one of Sir Hammerlock's legendary hunt objectives. The only other possible connection that could have been used to foreshadow something like this is one of Typhon de Leon's echologs.
Before I found that vault, Atlas was lagging behind the other guys. They'd almost got wiped out during the corporate wars and were looking to rise from the ashes like the... what's it called? That firebird.
It is a tad strange that he refers to a phoenix as a firebird. Perhaps using that terminology was meant for the player to think, well, Lilith is technically a firebird, but is she a phoenix who will rise again? Like I said, this was probably the weakest theory of them all. But that all leads to what is arguably the most canon scenario we as a player are inevitably going to encounter, and that's the Timekeeper. Either a creation or a prisoner the Iridians had locked in their many vaults some time ago. This monster's existence is revealed to us by Nereid through the message Secret.
With Pandora sealed and the Destroyer chained within, the greatest of the Iridian secrets is put to rest. It would be folly for me to think, though, that this is the last of them. There are countless other wonders or terrors they hid across the stars before my time. For every grave ward, traveler, or timekeeper, there are surely a dozen more slumbering in forgotten vaults.
We have encountered the Grave Ward as well as the Traveler, but we've yet to encounter the monster known as the Timekeeper. Unlike the first theory, which uses the comics to predict how Lilith's powers work, or the second theory, which is pure speculation, the Timekeeper was introduced in this game with a clear intention of foreshadowing the Vault monster for the future. We have never seen, nor have we ever heard of this monster outside of this one message. Only speculation currently surrounds it and everything related to it. Its name likely speaks for itself. Similar to the Warrior, the Sentinel, and the Traveler, its name seems to be relevant to their role. As a Timekeeper, one could only assume its power to potentially rewind time. It was the Sentinel that held knowledge of the future and likely the past, so it seems unlikely this monster would also be focused on knowledge. I think whatever this is, it is capable of messing with the flow of time. Another important question to ask is whether or not the Eridians created this as well. There's a healthy mix of prisoners and creations, though it's not as though it's ever been too much of a concern to the player. Everything is eventually just shot and killed. But up until this point, the characters we've always played as have never used any of the Vault monsters. Jack was the closest one who attempted to utilize the Warrior for, not exactly its intended purpose, but in a way that it could be used and controlled. And to a certain extent he succeeded before we put a stop to him. And the Sentinel was used to give Zarpedon information on the future. But in terms of Lilith and the Crimson Raiders, all we've ever done is shoot first. The Timekeeper may be a monster we don't want to kill. And perhaps, depending on whether or not they are a creation or a prisoner, it may incline or dissuade them from helping. Also, we've yet to see what other wonders exist elsewhere in existence. All the monsters we've found in vaults thus far have been titans in size and animalistic in nature. The Timekeeper may not be seeking a fight, nor is it guaranteed to be massive in scale. Even when it comes to Nereid, we've got no clue as to what she looked like. All sirens we've gotten thus far have been human, but as evident by the Eridians, we're not the only intelligent species that exists. Point is, the Timekeeper may look and be completely normal and intelligent, all things considered, locked away because of what it was capable of. Gearbox clearly introduced the Timekeeper with intent on foreshadowing its existence. As a player, it's unclear what this Vault monster is capable of and what its role will be moving forward. All of the events that occurred throughout the story of Borderlands 3, Lilith's death seems to be the most random. Maya's fate may be disappointing, but it appears her story was fulfilled in passing on her powers to Ava. Even if the Timekeeper is capable of bringing Maya back, she will no longer be a siren. On the other hand, when it comes to the Timekeeper, if the writers did intend on using it to revert deaths, you'd think more would have died, Lilith and Maya really being the only two casualties. Would they really introduce a Vault monster to revert 2 deaths? It may also indirectly bring back other ghosts from the past. If Maya is returned to life, then perhaps that would mean the Calypsos live again. If Roland comes back, Handsome Jack and Angel may as well. But that's just in my mind, going a little too crazy right now. One thing is for certain, and that's the story of Borderlands is far from over. But anyway guys, I want to know your thoughts on this subject. Do you believe Lilith is in fact dead, or do you think there's some other explanation going on? Be sure to let me know your thoughts on this, the Timekeeper, and anything else you may think is relevant to this topic. In the meantime, like the video if you liked it, subscribe for all sorts of new Borderlands content, and until next time, I'll see you in the next video.